We are recording on Thursday, March 14th, 2024 at 10:04 a.m. Eastern Time with retired Captain James Fanell and Mr. Bradley Thayer, and we're talking about the threat of communist China, which is something I've gone over on this show before. Very, pertinent considering, well, I guess the incoming general rising tide of feeling like World War III is on its way, but also on a lesser note, the debate to ban TikTok, whether or not they want to. On the show before, I've had Brigadier General Robert Spalding, who I think was formerly with the Hudson Institute. He was in Obama's National Security Council, and I think was removed for raising the alarm bell on China's 5G monopoly using the Belt and Road Initiative. And his book Stealth War is a fantastic book. He came on here early 2020, and it is something that, the three main points of y'all's book, which I think the biggest one is, and then I'll hand it over to y'all, is the praising of the almighty dollar. That much to me seems a little less nefarious. Not that there aren't, a whole moral quagmire of using slave labor, but that one seems less nefarious and more so just the average business looking out for its bottom line. Again, we can debate the morality another time, but I think the most insidious is the capture of U.S. elite and the downplaying of the threat. Right? Imagine if on September 12th, George Bush went and gave a speech on the rubble of the World Trade Center and said, we must not lash out at Muslims. People look at him and be like, what are you talking about, dude? But that's kind of where we are now. It's xenophobic if you call out China rising. It's xenophobic if you talk about the Thucydides trap, and it's xenophobic and racist if you think that, the United States should be gearing up and fighting back against as Brigadier General Robert Spalding says, a beautifully waged war by communist China. Captain Fanell, could you please introduce yourself, and then Mr. Thayer, you guys can take it away.
Sure. Well, first of all, Tommy, thanks for having us on the show.
Yes, sir.
It's an honor to talk to you. My name is Jim Fanell. I was in the Navy for 29 years. I was in naval intelligence for my whole career. And from basically 1999 until 2015, when I retired, I was focused on China. And so I had a series of assignments that were kind of unusual in naval intelligence at that time. I had served as the intelligence officer for the forward deployed aircraft carrier homeported out of Japan, the USS Kitty Hawk Carrier Strike Group. Then I was the 7th Fleet Intelligence Officer. And then finally was the U.S. Pacific Fleet Intelligence Officer and a stint at the Office of Naval Intelligence as the China Senior Intelligence Officer. So I spent basically every day for 15 years looking at Chinese Navy and the Chinese military in a really fine-grained way. Operational intelligence, at all. It was a foundation for everything that I did, even when I was at Pacific Fleet headquarters. So that's my experience, and I'll let Brad talk about himself.
Dr. Thayer.
Well, Tommy, it's wonderful to join you, and thanks for having us on to talk about our book, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. My background is a bit different than Jim's. I was an academic and worked in think tank communities in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm principally did work on great power politics and the rise of China, of course, and have written a few books before. The latest one with Jim. So it's our great pleasure to join you with, of course, our different backgrounds, which we always say go together like peanut butter and chocolate in terms of complementing each other from different avenues, if you will. But thanks very much again for having us on.
Yes, sir. Thank you both for coming on. And this is, it's a tired, I guess, analogy or example or thought exercise I've used on the show a million times, but I'll say it again for everyone that hasn't been listening. I often look at where we are now the same way you look back at World War II, World War One. They're bookmarked. You have your starting date, your ending date, and we know what happens and when it happens. And it's like seeing a movie for the second time. You know the spoiler alerts. Oh, he's gonna die in the fifth act, and he's so. You look back at, you could either say September 1st, 1939, the Blitzkrieg going into Poland, or you could say 1933, Hitler coming to power. On the longest grouping of time, you would say 1933 to 1945. That's 12 years. And I think that, I know at least for me, it's 33-year-old, I don't really put that into perspective now. But in 50 years or 100 years, looking back at where we are now, it might not be that big of a stretch to say, oh, December 2019 to January 2020 is when World War III started officially with, the shots of theoretically a bioweapon. And then you can see over the coming years, there were, chances at appeasement and little flare ups that right now seem independent. Ukraine and Russia, Israel and Hamas, and eventually China and Taiwan. But if you were to look at it in the same way we look at World War One and World War Two, I mean, we're 4 years into theoretically a 12-year block if we're to associate with World War Two. Is that where we are right? And again, it's not that you have a crystal ball. If you had the answer to this, that's the $1 trillion question. But if either of you want to take it, are we going to one day look back at this with the clarity that we look back at World War II and World War One and say, oh, this is how it started. This is how World War III started. And like World War One, if you go back and read all the officials and chancellors and generals they're saying quotes that are eerily applicable to today. Like, government and industry are too intertwined internationally. It could never happen. And with the mechanization powers that we have today, war would be so brutal as to be unimaginable. Yet that was World War One, and then another one followed. So, do either of y'all want to take that? Are we slowly slipping into World War III? And a follow up is it avoidable?
Well, Tommy, thanks. I'm happy to take the question.
Sure.
My argument is that it's quite reasonable to think that there's an event, there's a date, the bioweapon, or other events. I see it a bit differently. I see it as longer, that the Chinese Communist Party has been at war with us since they came to power in 1949. And we fought a hot war with them in Korea. They greatly facilitated the North Vietnamese effort against us during the Vietnam War. Their aggression against us has been unrelenting in many respects. We were allies of a kind, briefly, during the Cold War against the Soviet Union. But we need to recognize that Mao Zedong always saw us as the principal enemy of China, even when the Soviets were, if you will, in his face. Deng Xiaoping, one of his successors, of course, saw us as an enemy as well, and did something quite artful, which is why we often call him the greatest strategist of the 20th century, where he recognized that he was in a period of profound vulnerability in 1989 and in the aftermath, when communist regimes were falling worldwide in Central and Eastern Europe, and then ultimately the Soviet Union. He had to do something to save the Chinese Communist Party, and he did. He came up with a strategy, which is often shorthand called hide and buy, that made Wall Street and American investors his partner. So what he did is he welcomed in American investment and manufacturing while he did his utmost to minimize the threat that he posed, while, of course, surreptitiously and directly, he saw us as the enemy. And that was essentially something which was irrevocable. We were the enemy because we were capitalists in the principal capitalist state, and he wanted to destroy us. The problem was he didn't have the power. His answer was to make Wall Street and US and New York investors his partner. And that gave him the power ultimately to challenge us and to see the situation as it is today, where the People's Republic of China is our greatest existential foe. So Deng Xiaoping laid a foundation where China was about 0.6% of world gross domestic product in 1990, and then in 2019 they are about 19% of world gross domestic product. In 30 years, they went from a essentially underdeveloped nation to our existential threat. And it was what Deng Xiaoping did, as well as what we did, to allow him into our economic ecosystem through the failed and dangerous policy of engagement, what we call the engagement school, which consistently threat deflated. It always underestimated the threat from the Chinese Communist Party and the growth of China's military, as well as diplomatic might, economic might, technological capabilities. And so we should think of this as really through the lens of a communist, and we should start thinking like communists. And communists don't, if you will, declare war on you. What they seek to do is undermine you internally. They seek to undermine you so that you fall, or you're converted. In essence, you're taken over by by the efforts of the communists without kinetic war, right? Which is the point of what Deng Xiaoping is doing. And we can see his fruits have been extremely successful. So I'll end there and let Jim add his reflections on the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm in alignment with Brad on this. It's exactly, this war's been going on since 1 October 1949. And the Communist Party has sought to overthrow the United States and displace us from being basically the world's leader, a benign leader that's benefited more people around the world than any other government in the history of mankind. What Brad talks about is that their desire to undermine us and infiltrate us is like a cancer. They want to eat us out from the inside with the cancer, but they've also prepared themselves militarily. And we highlight that in the book, is that they prioritize spending on the military over the last 30 plus years. You saw it just again this last couple of weeks with their 2 sessions that they hold every March in Beijing, their National People's Congress, where they announced that their gross domestic product target for the year would be 5% for the nation. They want to grow by 5%. But before they said that, they had firmly announced, we will grow the military by 7.2%. And that kind of increased growth of the PLA over their own domestic growth has been going on for over 30 years. And so that's why we saw the PLA, if you will, like the Navy, go from being a brown water force in 2000 to now being a global Navy. It's not the same as our Navy, but it's got ships that are at sea right now conducting a naval operation or exercises with the Iranian Navy and the Russian Navy in the Gulf outside of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, they're exercising and training and working together. This is the 4th exercise they've done since 2019, while our ships are being attacked by Houthis with anti-ship ballistic missiles and anti-ship cruise missiles and drone technology that's all come from China. So in a very serious way, China has developed kinetic capabilities that are as Brad said, an existential threat to us today. In the last 3 years, they built 300 to 350 ICBM silos in central and western China that we know most likely house the DF-41, which has somewhere between 3, 6, or 10 independent reentry vehicles. So that means they have literally now at least 1,000, probably more like 1,500 to 2,000, warheads just in that field alone that is pointed at the United States. And this gives them an advantage when it comes to doing what they want to do in terms of what they call their great rejuvenation, which is to restore China to what they think is their territory, which is to take Taiwan, take the South China Sea, take the Senkakus, take disputed territories with India, and even take Mongolia, which they're doing a pretty good job internally destroying the people in Mongolia. So there is this sense that they will use all tools in their kit bag to go after and achieve their objectives. And they call it comprehensive national power. And the 98, 99 million members of the Communist Party are unified in this goal. And they're working together and they test out theories and they do scientific development for saying, if I turn up the rheostat on the economic war, what will this do to the military? What will this do to the diplomacy? And they test and they work all this out. And they've been very successful at doing it. And our book and our thesis of our book is that we didn't pay attention to this threat. And the very people that were paid to pay attention, the president, the Congress, the military, the State Department, those people, we know who they are. We worked in the service. These people failed. And they failed because they didn't fully appreciate what communism is. Even though we had experienced communism and fighting communism in the Cold War, this generation, the baby boomer generation, if you will, the generation that Brad and I are part of, they failed to learn the lessons and to adhere to the lessons that the greatest generation taught us after World War II and fighting the Cold War. And so that failure is what our book examines, that failure and how did it happen. And we examine the different administrations, Republican and Democrat. We examine the intelligence community, and we examine the Navy, one element of the Defense Department, probably the one element that probably had the biggest equities in providing an early warning and making sure that we weren't surprised. How could it happen that I joined the Navy in 1986 and we had nearly 600 ships in Ronald Reagan's Navy. And by the time I retired, we were down to 287 or so. And the Chinese Navy went from being 100 ships 25 years ago, 100 ships less than us, and now they're over 100 ships greater than us, and they're the largest Navy on the nation, and a Navy that doesn't just have a lot of ships, but has advanced anti-ship cruise missiles, anti-ship ballistic missiles, and hypersonic missiles today that put our fleet at great risk. So it's a totality of this package that we fail to understand, and therefore we fail to react to. And that's why we're in this unenviable position.
I think, as Michael Pillsbury said in his book, I think it's the 100-Year Marathon, you never ask the way to the king's cauldrons. And that the translation, if I remember, I read it 4 years ago, was basically if it's an ancient way to say, if you come for the king, you best not miss. You don't want to take a pot shot at the king and then have the king's guard come and decapitate you. You want to wait until you have a perfect, you got him in the crosshairs, and there's zero doubt that you can make the coup happen. And so I think that's why a lot of people, and I formerly did, so I looked at it and I thought, well, we would know, right? There would be this like rising skirmish, and I don't think that's at all the case. I think it's more so like when you're sitting around a campfire and you're just kind of watching it at the end of the night. You're not throwing on any more logs. It's just burning and crackling, and it doesn't move for an hour, and then it just goes boom, and everything falls at once. And it's because it's been hollowed out from the inside. And I think that's probably much more likely the way in which we will see it, the most realistic physical engagement with China. And I think back to what was, maybe you guys could remind me because I was very young and I don't remember it. I read it, but was it under Clinton's administration that I think it was after Desert Storm we had sent a carrier fleet or a carrier strike group into the Taiwanese Strait as a show of force and trying to completely back down? Can anyone truly tell yourself, if we did that today, that you're confident that things wouldn't pop off? I think that alone is a canary, is that couldn't happen today. And I think more importantly, and it's what you said prior, that, as far as governments go in world history, the one that has benefited the majority of mankind the most, that's an uncomfortable thing that I know that I've, shied away from when I was younger. It's nothing's perfect. The United States has its flaws, but if you just do any cursory examination of the history of man, it is a history of power projection. It's just what it is. We can debate how it's bad, and it's just what it is. We're carbon-based life forms. We eat carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and we need water and shelter. It's just what it is. Don't hate the player, hate the game. It's just we're on this earth. Is it a simulation? Are we creations of God? I don't know. It's beyond the scope of this. It is where we are. The history of man is who has the bigger rock, the sharper spear, the more accurate musket. It's just what it is. And I would rather us be on top with a gun and deciding not to use it than to have someone else with a gun pointed at you and hoping they don't use it. And doesn't mean I like that scenario. It just means it's the one where we are. Do you think there's any sort of, if either you want to take it, is there a hesitation in that people, it's obviously become in vogue, especially my generation, which is despicable, to hate the United States. It's very fashionable to hate us. Do you think that is being perpetuated as well by China to, get rid of the fascist dictatorship, get rid of the evil white nationalists, and let's take it down. And then who are the first people that are always up against the wall? It's the revolutionaries that carried out the coup because they've shown themselves to be competent and willing to do something. Do you think that's being perpetuated, that there's some idea that America is the great Satan and that, it's not even ignorance, but rather welcoming China to take over, which will be a rude awakening?
Well, of course, the Chinese Communist Party sees us as their existential foe because they're communists. So we're a barrier to them. That is, America is a capitalistic and liberal small L, right? A polity which was defined by political liberalism since its founding in 1776. So it has to be destroyed. The fact that we're in a period of ideological upheaval as political liberalism battles with communism really for the first time openly in the United States, is certainly going to be capitalized upon by our enemy, the People's Republic of China. So and they'll do everything they can, of course, to put us at sixes and sevens, right? To sow dissension in the United States by any mechanism possible. And so I think that's just normal international politics 101. That's what your existential foe is going to do. And the fact that we're going through this transition, that we're going through this battle, ideological battle between what are called progressives, right, in the Democratic Party, and traditional adherents to political liberalism, right, the traditional ideology of the United States, is one that that they, of course, can use and twist to their advantage. But that's not the only mechanism, of course. There are technologies like TikTok, of course, and other technologies that they can do. There's also the old-fashioned tool of bribery, right? Using their money to gain influence in universities and media, founding Penn Biden centers, right? Supporting Penn Biden centers, working with Silicon Valley, working with Wall Street, working with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and working with politicians of both parties. So the tools that they have, to some degree, we've given them, but they've also forged and expertly, I think, to a considerable degree. But we allowed this to happen, right? It was, again, year after year, which is a major argument that we make in the book, that this threat arose year after year. And again, we did not respond when we might have, for several different reasons, one of which was it was always seen that there was something greater, right? That there was an immediate threat today versus a threat from the People's Republic of China that might be coming years down the road, right? And of course, the Chinese Communist Party did its utmost always to feed that, right? That they were never an immediate threat. It was always something maybe by 2049, the centenary of the revolution, that they would be a threat, or some point in the future, when in fact they were working assiduously to undermine us within the US as well as in international politics. So, and your point about Americans don't realize that, of course, is absolutely spot on. They don't realize what the United States provided as the global sheriff, right? As the watchman in international politics, as the guy who's going to make sure the trains run on time. He's going to make sure the global economy functions, that if aggression occurs, it can be checked in conjunction with our allies and partners around the world. Now, this is under tremendous strain. And we're seeing the consequences of that. If the U.S. goes away as the night watchman or the global sheriff or global policeman, you're going to find that conflicts, wars that the U.S. suppressed, for example, due to its power, right? It was its hard power. It was military force and economic might and diplomatic acumen that allowed it to generate tremendous stability in the post-Cold War period, after the Soviet Union fell. And it was American power that greatly contributed to a peaceful end of the Cold War, and then segueing to a period of stability that your generation knows and expects and assumes is the 11th commandment.
Yeah.
Right? But it's not the 11th commandment. There were only 10. So there is no essentially fundamental rule that says the U.S. is always going to be dominant. And when the U.S. is under tremendous strain, your generation, as all of us, and it's cold comfort, of course, is going to find the world that the communists are building, the Chinese communists are building, is going to look very different for communities that receive a great deal of attention today. That the human rights abuses that the Chinese communists are committing against the Muslims in Xinjiang and elsewhere, the genocide that's being committed against them, is going to spread. The human rights abuses, suppression of religious freedom, political freedom, etc., the Tibetan people, is only going to be done on orders of magnitude greater scale if the U.S. retreats, if the U.S. weakens, or if the U.S. falls. and that's going to be a very different world. And so the question that we face in this century is the one that we face in the last: is tyranny or freedom going to be dominant? And in the last century, with a tremendous amount of blood spilt, the question was answered that freedom won at the end of the day. In the 21st century, we don't know. Again, we face that, and we face it with generational differences among Americans that have potentially a tremendous cost if we're not able to explain, and if Americans of all generations and of all backgrounds are not able to understand that American power is the world's greatest force for good in international politics. And if that disappears, then you've opened a Pandora's box, which is going to see that the 21st century is defined by tyranny, unlike the 20th.
And they're if you say those things, right, that the world exists under the United States acting as the global sheriff, the reply is often, oh, you're just a nationalist. What do you think is going to replace this? People who, like, what's this? People that don't like their country? No, they're going to come in and they're going to bulldoze you. But instead of you being able to have the freedom to get on Twitter and say, I live in a fascist dictatorship, America sucks, if you do that, you, your parents, your grandparents, your kids, and your grandkids will all be worked to death in a bauxite mine building iPhones. That is the norm right now. And I mean, I have two friends that immigrated. Ivan from Sofia, Bulgaria, the bodybuilder. He looks like the Terminator. And then my buddy Prince from Kosovo. And I've had Prince on here a couple months ago, but I always love talking to both of them because it's just so sobering. Whenever I start to drift to, like, maybe the idea of American exceptionalism is BS. They'll just look at me. There's just like there's an emptiness behind their eyes, and they look. Ivan will say in his Terminator, he'll be like, "You do not know what you have," and he'll just stare at you. And you, I had on Prince a couple months ago, and I was like, Prince, what do you think about the people that say America is like a third world nation? And he's like, not only do I think they're dumb shit, they're 110% dumb shit. And I look at him, I'm just like, there's no timidity or tepidness when you come clear. Like, well, I just think the United States is. They just look at you with the same way that, regardless of Democrat or Republican, if I hold this water bottle up and say I'm going to let go of it, everyone goes, oh, it's going to fall. There's no opinion. There's no hesitation. They just look at you and they're like, why would you do it? Don't throw a match in the gas. It's going to light on fire. There's no like, well, that's your opinion, man. They just look at you. They're like, you have no idea what you have. But I fear that is where it's going. And you do have to admire the war that China is waging because, back to the ICBMs, with mutual assured destruction, with hundreds or thousands of independent reentry vehicles, multi-megatons facing one another, and they're nearly impossible. I mean, I guess Reagan's Star Wars tried to, but that has almost negated the possibility of total war. Or if there is total war, that will be the final moments, and then it'll just be over. A couple people in Cheyenne Mountain will survive, but that sucks. There almost is if it hits that ceiling of we both know that we can't launch the nukes, then the next thing is you have to operate just below that ceiling. And that's what they're doing. It's not stupidity, it's not weakness. They're looking at it and they're going, they won't fire the nukes either. They love their penthouse in Manhattan. They don't want to lose it. They love going to the Bahamas. So what's just below that? Well, you infiltrate it and you act surreptitiously, and you would do economic warfare. You would sow dissent. You would offer schools and warm water ports to African nations. This is how you would do it. And it's not as easy as just being the brute jock force of like, we'll send 10,000 Abrams tanks. Like that worked in World War II with because that's what the war was. The war is different now. It changed forever on August 6th and August 9th, 1945. This is the new paradigm. You have to fight this way. Is there any way in which the United States can gear up and fight them on this level? Or, and this is more of a, I guess, a darker thought, is it in our interest to pull them into a kinetic war where we can beat them? If either of you want to touch that.
I'll go ahead. First of all, I would not recommend going into kinetic war
No,
with China right
no, no,
now,
no.
because we're not going to be able to necessarily know that we could beat them. And in fact, in many ways, if it was out in the Western Pacific over Taiwan or the,
Hmm.
Second Thomas Shoal or something like that, there's a very good chance that we could have a serious loss. Just like it's a very serious chance that we could lose a combatant, a warship, or even an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea or the Eastern Mediterranean right now, because of the proliferation of these anti-ship ballistic missiles that are down to the rebels like the Houthis. So I wouldn't do that. Is there a chance for us to survive and win? Yes, there always is. As Brad and I like to talk, and Brad mentions and repeats to me, 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence, and it changed the world. 12
Mm.
men worked with one guy. They also, 2,000 years ago, had an impact on the world. So small groups of people that really believe in a superior idea can change the world. And one of the things that our book doesn't really address, fully, is the issue of education. Now, we talk about joint professional military education, and we talk about the importance of understanding communism. But in this idea of people are, or the Americans are hating, the citizens of America hate our country, hate our history, think it's a evil organization and full of, all kinds of bad things that don't square with their values that they've been taught in school. Well, I think that's one of the areas that, in our book, we hold the presidents accountable, we hold the IC accountable, we hold the military accountable. But one thing that we don't really we reference, but we could talk about here more, is we need to hold American people to account, because the American people like us that know better and our colleagues that knew better allowed communism to seep into our educational system, K through 12, over the last 40 years, and to promote and teach this erosion of our moral fiber, and not teach about the history of America, what it means to be a good citizen, what it means to have a civil society, and what it means to have self-sacrifice for your nation. Now, a lot of people did sacrifice over the last 35 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, and those people paid dearly with their lives, and they should be held up as examples of what that means to love your country, to even sacrifice your own life. But that generally is a small, small, small percentage of the American population. And in fact, those people are now, in many circles, the elite circles in Washington and the East Coast and the West Coast, those people are ridiculed.
Mm.
So the idea that we're not training ourselves, and our parents, the parents of their children, have basically turned their kids over to the state and said, you educate them. Well, what do we expect that we're seeing right now? And so I think that's an area where I think, as a military guy in my career, I didn't pay enough attention to, because I was deploying and going, and education wasn't my, I didn't focus in on that. And I think if I had to do anything over again over the course of my life, was to be more engaged with what's going on in education. I didn't have children, but I mean, if I didn't have children but had this knowledge that I do today, I would have been much more proactive in questioning what kind of education was being given to children, and why children are not being taught their history. Why are they being taught to hate their country? And what can we do to engage our children and to help them learn what it means? Because this, as we've all been saying, this is a very fragile thing. The United States is the exception to recorded history
Mm.
in terms of having that power, but not abusing it and benefiting as many people as we did over the 2.5 centuries. And so we need to grab that back from our children. I think is the first thing, is we need to make that a national priority. And then obviously the other thing that I think needs to happen, and I know that there's General Spaulding's a great guy, and I know there's a lot of focus on the soft power and the non-kinetic side of life, but we have to get our kinetic house in order to fight China. We spent 35 years focused on the Middle East, and for valid reasons, and I get that. But we failed, and we bring this up extensively in the book, as we failed to realize that one of the prime responsibilities of the Department of Defense was to look out, to look
Mm.
forward to future threats. And we did not adapt, even after President Trump, who was an exception to this, kowtowing and appeasement to Beijing. his administration challenged the assumption of engagement, the first time that any administration had done that. But even in their administration, they were essentially had their hands tied in many ways, not from the left that was going after them, which is certainly true, but just the institution of the Pentagon. When they were asking for new budget submissions in the first couple of years, I was hearing stories from in the Pentagon saying that basically the services were giving them new budget submissions, and all they did was take the older submissions that had been going on for the CENTCOM AOR, and they just erased CENTCOM and wrote in PACOM, and they submitted the same kind of budgets. Give me more of this, give me more of that. There was no leadership, there was no innovation, there was no respect for the threat that was emerging out of China, and no preparation for the fact that it's going to be a naval and air war over the Pacific, and that we didn't have the tools and resources necessary not only to deter them from taking action, but to actually now, even as you said, imagine trying to send a carrier in like we did in 95 and 96 during the Taiwan missile crisis. I mean, we did that with impunity. We didn't fear a thing from China 30 years ago. It's almost 30 years ago. Today, we have leaders that have openly said, I'm not sure I would send it in because of the DF-21D or the DF-26. So we're working to, have that capability to operate inside their counter-intervention umbrella, if you will, but it's problematic right now, and we have not still today reversed course. Trump started it, but the last 3 years have seen that any effort to rebuild the military shattered now with this new administration, and essentially a full return to engagement that we've seen this last year with all the visits with Blinken and Yellen and Kissinger and Kerry and Raimondo, and then the culmination with Biden meeting with Xi in November last year in San Francisco, and the double standing ovation that 400 plus Wall Street and Silicon Valley billionaires gave to Xi. So when we have our leadership turning back to the dog's vomit of engagement, we're in a really serious place, and it's going to take people like you and your podcast to awaken the American people that they're going to have to solve this themselves, just like those Americans did in 1776.
Is there any chance that that Space Force is a some silver lining in that, and that there was some, right, as 47 when they separated the Air Force from the U.S. Army Air Forces, is the high ground does tend to have a disproportionate amount of authority and advantage, not enough to win, but is there any optimism in this 1 hour we have together that is there something in Space Force that it's hey, at least we're kind of formalizing a militarized faction of I don't know what space real estate is there, or is it too little too late?
My sense is that the creation of the Space Force was another great initiative from the former president. There's no question about it. You just saw the news that hit today from Reuters about it's been revealed that the Trump administration was holding a covert CIA program to spread disinformation inside China to delegitimize the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not happy that that's out in the press, but it's just another reminder of the elements of that administration and how they fundamentally transformed 40 years of pro-engagement and appeasement to the Chinese Communist Party. And that administration was doing everything that they could in the circumstances that they were living in, and that administration being under assault every day from all kinds of other things. But they did take the effort to stop the decline of the military, creation of the Space Force, closing of embassies in our own country, closing of Chinese Confucius Institutes by denying U.S. Department of Defense dollars to universities, which was considered outrageous at the time. But we're all these, the tariffs, obviously, all these things were showing that we were trying to make some effort. So, the details of what, clandestine programs we have in space, I don't have. But I can imagine that given the background of that administration and the people that were in it that I know, that there's clearly something good there that was being made an effort for. The problem is China is also racing to the high ground. And our colleague Rick Fisher and others have talked extensively about China's efforts here in the last couple of years to get to space. And they're going to have 100 launches next year. And they're achieving, capabilities with putting facilities down in the Antarctic and in Argentina to give them more advantage in space. And remember, in September 2022, they did that fractional orbital bombardment system test launch that sent a hypersonic vehicle around the Earth. So they've already proven that they can steal our technology and then spring from that into advantages for them. So we are in a like a giant sumo match in a way when it comes to space, in my opinion. But I'll let Brad add anything he has.
Well, there's tremendous reason to be optimistic about certainly in the military realm, but more fundamentally, it's based on our ideology. It's the fact that freedom is superior to tyranny. And so when we're asking, and as Americans query themselves, of course, there's reason to be optimistic and to be supremely confident in victory over the Chinese Communist Party. First, because they're illegitimate. They don't represent the Chinese people. They are a Western ideology imposed by Stalin on the Chinese people. And it's completely divorced from Chinese civilization or historical forms of Chinese governance. Secondly, there's reason to be optimistic because that tyranny can't last, right? That abuse, it's a fully negative force, which is based on tyrannical control over the Chinese people, which is going to end someday because of the inherent, if you will, contradictions of any communist government. Thirdly, Americans need to recognize that their ideology is superior to communism, to the ideology of the CCP, or whether or in the United States, right? That takes a different guise within the United States, but it's an echo of the debate that we have in international politics domestically. The struggle against communism takes an international form against the CCP, but also a domestic form. But political liberalism offers a far greater essentially ideology that maximizes freedom for individuals. It's a reason why everyone is trying to come to the US, right? I mean, people are not fleeing to China.
Correct.
They wouldn't be allowed in, but they're trying to get here because our system is superior. Next, Americans need to be confident in victory, right? We've defeated tyranny before. Nazism, Italian fascism, Japanese militarism, the tyranny of the Soviet communist tyranny of the Soviet Union and their Warsaw Pact allies. And so we did that because we marshaled ourselves, we steeled ourselves for a long competition that was intense, and we were willing to pay the costs in blood, of course, in treasure, and in so many other ways that we paid. We can steel ourselves again if we understand the threat. So what we need to do is metaphorically clear the cobwebs away from our vision and recognize what our tremendous capabilities are, and again steel ourselves for it with our allies and partners, right? Like India and Taiwan, the tremendous number of allies we have from Australia to Japan to our NATO allies worldwide. We have so many, and then people around the world who reject communist tyranny in all of its forms and who've had any type of engagement with the Chinese Communist Party, right? Which leaves them with a very bad taste, right? The CCP is all about exploitation of people and the environment. So wherever they show up, wherever a Chinese entity shows up, it's going to be exploitative, whether that's in Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Cambodia or essentially in Djibouti. Or in South Central America or West Coast of Africa or in Europe, it's always the same. So people essentially are going to have this test empirically, which the U.S. is winning and upon which we could capitalize, which is the U.S. is a better ally, it's a better friend, it's a better partner than the CCP. It offers a future of international politics, which is not defined by exploitation, but can work cooperatively with states around the world and with people around the world. And so that empirical reality is something Americans need once again to recognize and to steel ourselves for this fight against the CCP. Again, this regime, the Chinese Communist Party, has such tremendous weaknesses, right? It's not a giant, but it certainly does have clay feet. And if we're able to push it, it can fall. And getting rid of it would be, as Ronald Reagan observed in March of '83 about the Soviet Union, right? It's the center of evil in the modern world, Reagan said of the Soviet Union. Well, so too the CCP is of today's world. And if we can get rid of it, and essentially get rid of that threat of belligerence, because it's a hyper-aggressive government, it's a hyper-aggressive regime, and restore really the Chinese people to their greatness, right? Restore the Han people to their situation where they're able to see that they don't need to be ruled by communist tyranny, as in fact they recognize and try their utmost to free themselves from it. But the communists have advantages that Stalin didn't have, right? Stalin kept his tyranny by a secret police that had to have a policeman on every block, in every apartment building. Well, the CCP can do this cheaply because they're relying on information technology, right? It's IT, it's essentially advances, obviously in artificial intelligence, its advancement and the ubiquitous aspect of cell phones, of a social credit score, which can be policed very effectively, which all Chinese people have to have. And that there are efforts, as you well know, to bring that to the United States in a different guise. Well, they can police an enormous population very effectively. And 24/7, it's ubiquitous. And that really hurts the Chinese people. But working with the diaspora, people of goodwill, and people within China themselves, right? This regime is so odious and so illegitimate. If we can put efforts on it to pressure it, it can fall. And that would be the greatest source. That would be the greatest source of peace and stability in international politics, if we could put this regime on the ash heap of history. And so we should marshal our efforts to do so, while recognizing, as has been a theme in this conversation, that we need to teach ourselves about communism. Because communism takes place in the US in different guises. It also takes place, of course, internationally, driven by the Chinese Communist Party. And if we can educate ourselves once again, and again, there's a generational difference. Folks our age, Jim and my age, have an understanding of it that younger Americans have a difficulty perhaps comprehending. But if you can educate yourself on the threat and the nature of that ideology, I think that's going to steel Americans, again, working with allies and partners around the world, to unite, to overthrow this, and to make the 21st century even a brighter one than we had at the end of the 20th century.
To pull it in topically, I guess, in the final couple minutes, is it's a conundrum. I almost think it's a good test, and I'm not sure what the answer is, what the correct answer is, of banning TikTok. On one hand, is that stealing ourselves and acknowledging the threat of China, or do you have to take the higher road and go, you don't do that in the United States? You can be free to this info. I understand the whole spyware, malware, but that's every piece of technology that's ever been produced everywhere forever. I'm not sure I entirely buy that threat. I also don't know. I'm 33 with a biology degree. It's not like I worked in the NSA or something. Captain Fanell, could you maybe touch on that? Is it the American thing to ban TikTok, or is it not?
Well, this is obviously a hot topic, and the House just passed that bill yesterday, and we're waiting for the Senate.
Yeah.
And see how they put their spin on it. And the president has said that he would sign it. So I think in some sense, there's an alignment with a lot of people recognizing that this is a threat. The concern that I have, well, twofold. First, we have to make it unambiguously clear that the Chinese Communist Party is using TikTok to demoralize the American, the generation that uses it the most. I don't use TikTok, but I just heard some statistics that say that the average American teenager spends, 11 hours a week, and these are 6-second, 10-second videos, and they spend 11 to 12 hours a week on that TikTok. So you can imagine how many videos they're watching. And they're seeing videos and things that are not seen in China that the Chinese government would never allow their own people to see. So we know that they're polluting the minds of our young people. They're trying to turn it into mush. It's an old movie used to talk about. The purpose of going to law school is to turn your brain into something sharp, not a bowl full of mush. So that's what they're doing, and they're being pretty successful at it. If you see some of these videos, and when we go up, people go up and ask some people on the street questions about, what's the capital of this country, or how old is the country, or basic stuff that it seems like many people don't know the basics anymore of civil society. So they're being successful at it. So I strongly supported banning that. Now, you have the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment, and this idea that we should be very, very, very leery of our government, federal government, being able to basically come in and occupy our privacy. That's something that we fought the revolution to prevent the redcoats from doing. So, the act right after 9/11, the Patriot Act, there's been clearly abuses there. I worked in the system. I know what the NSA does. I know that the head of the NSA at one point was concerned about it. Former Admiral that headed up, Admiral Rogers, had some concerns. So any kind of system like that is open to abuse of power. So we need to be very, very careful about that. We need to make sure that the language of this law, if passed, would be very clearly about banning Chinese Communist Party access to an infiltration of the American populace. That's a no-brainer. We don't want the Chinese Communist Party or any Communist Party infiltrating America, especially the Chinese communists, because of what we've just been talking about for an hour, and what it means, and how it's so debilitating to our moral fiber and our ability to defend ourselves, which is what people really want, which is to be able to live and freely and exist. So I think in terms of TikTok, we need to look at it very, very hard, and we should not be ashamed to say, hey, you're a Chinese Communist Party. We're not going to let you do that. We wouldn't have let the Soviets do that in the Cold War. So I don't see there's a big difference. China doesn't allow us to do certain things in their country. So it's not like some kind of reciprocity argument doesn't apply either. So I think it's just purely from if they were pointing guns at us and firing missiles, for instance, we would say, hey, we're going to ban any company from working with those companies that sell missile technology. We should have.
Sure.
We didn't at one point back in the 90s under the Clinton administration. We gave them access to our missile technology. So we've made these mistakes in the past, and they've always come back to bite us. So in this case, I think we should ban it. But I think also the previous discussion about what we should do and all the great things that Brad said about engaging in this fight, we need to also be able to remind people of what they just went through. They just went through a Chinese communist virus. You can say it's a bioweapon or not. That doesn't really matter. What matters is
it was Chinese.
Was locked down because of a Chinese virus, and we had people in our own country adopting Chinese Communist Party social credit system type authoritarian procedures to lock us down. So we should be appealing to people's basic sense of freedom and liberty. And unfortunately, many people have been trained in their schools that the highest form of civic virtue is to allow yourself to be told what to do by the government, because that means you care about your community more than yourself. And that perversion of what it really means to have a community and have a nation that's based on freedom and liberty, that they've done a very good job of polluting the children's minds in America to think that, well, yeah, if I mask up and I get as many vaccines as possible, that therefore I am being a good citizen, as opposed to saying, why are you doing this? Why are you telling me I can't walk on a beach when there's no one on me? Why I can't go to a church, but I can go to a liquor store or a strip joint? There's so many authoritarian inconsistencies that occurred during the COVID period that should have been a wake-up call. And so we need to do a better job of reminding people and never letting them forget what they endured, and how that was generated by Chinese communist ideology. We should never, ever forget that. It's kind of like the Alamo. We don't forget the Alamo. We don't forget 7 December 1941. We don't forget 9/11. And we should not forget what the Chinese Communist Party did to us and those that went along with it in our own country during COVID. So I'll just end right there.
Uh, to
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about our book.
Of
We
course, Dr.
we
Thayer.
greatly appreciate it.
Um, to 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 respectfully play devil's advocate, not even necessarily disagree with you, but uh just to I guess throw that out there is it's if we're gonna ban TikTok, I would if I'm dictator, it's okay, but then you got to go all in. It's no Chinese buying farmland, no Chinese buying land by U.S. military bases, no selling these essential resources, these military tactical resources to China. It's all or nothing. My issue with banning TikTok would, as someone that was, I actually started my podcast the day that we now know the day COVID came to the United States, December 12th, 2019. So perhaps it was written in the stars, but I've been banned from iTunes, YouTube, Reddit, and Twitter. And I've interviewed, even before they went on Joe Rogan, Dr. McCullough, Dr. Robert Malone, the inventor of the mRNA vaccine technology. I've had on the Chinese Dr. Li Mingyang, the whistleblower, who I think just 2 days ago was attacked by some Chinese operative. Um, I was banned from all of those for discussing, not even calling it a bioweapon, but saying it came from Wuhan. I was banned. I was called racism. It was called medical misinformation. My concern with banning TikTok isn't that the intention isn't good. It's that if we're also going to entertain the idea of elite capture, well, then we've now set a precedent to ban something that we call, detrimental to American national security. What happens when the people who, let's say there's elite capture of somebody at the NSA or the CIA or the Department of State or whatever, Supreme Court? At what point do they start banning things because you could masquerade it as, oh, this is a Chinese threat, this is a Russian threat. But what if they're now in the pocket of China? Is the thing they're banning something like Truth Social, right, which is an alternative to Twitter? And you could make up an argument and say, oh, it's pro-Chinese, whatever. Or what they did for 4 years, say Donald Trump's a Russian operative. You're now giving them the gun. At what point you have to be concerned about, what if the police are dirty, right? I'll just call the cops if somebody comes to my house. Well, what if the cops are working with the guy that broke into your house? Like, you do have to think about those things, and that would be my, again, not even necessarily disagreeing with you, but just devil's advocating it, just wargaming that is, if you're gonna ban this, how certain are you that the government itself is 100% pro-American? Is there elite capture or is there not? Because if there's elite capture, I would say avoid any and every bill that they pass that, if I'm a Chinese operative, I would say anything that erodes constitutional rights or human rights, I would give it a thumbs up. I would lie about it and be like, oh yeah, it's a Russian app, knowing full well it's actually a modern manifestation of free speech. Just food for thought. That's just kind of my thoughts on it. And uh, lastly, Dr. Thayer, I think you need to run for office. You went on like a good 5 minute rant there that I was like, I'll vote for this guy. I'd watch that campaign ad. That was brilliant.
Well, thank you very much. And it was uh, the I would just turn that around and say that I think you should,
Oh, God.
actually, with your background and with your interests. But we really appreciated the
Yes,
opportunity to speak with
absolutely.
you on the book today. And again, Embracing Communist China,
Mm-hmm.
America's Greatest Strategic Failure, which is available wherever folks buy books. And we were very pleased that Steve Bannon contributed the foreword
Yeah.
um, to the book.
And
So
for everybody listening,
um,
sorry, the link to that book is in the description. You can get it on Kindle. You can get it. You can get a hard copy. Yeah. So please go grab it. Please go. Yeah. Get it. And again, if read it and make up your own mind. I think that's kind of the one takeaway I've had from my podcast. Sorry to interrupt you, Doctor Thayer, but it's make up your own mind. You're a functioning adult. You've got an operating brain. Maybe it's rotted through TikTok. Hit the gym, get some sleep, start reading, and start using your own critical thinking. And I think inevitably you will acknowledge that we do live in the best system there is. And the chances that this system of human rights and civil liberties also exists on a continent separated by two oceans, it is so vanishingly small. You you can't throw it away and hope it just arises again. This is so, you flip. It's like the first time you ever flip a coin and it lands on its like side, And you're like, oh, it's like, no, 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 that's not normal. Don't expect that. That doesn't happen. So that's what I would say. But Dr. Thayer, Captain Fanell, I would love to have you guys on again. That was awesome. And I thoroughly appreciate both of y'all's time out of your day, your input, and your candid wisdom. And so genuinely, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes,
We
sir.
greatly enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It was an honor to talk to you, and we'd be happy to come back whenever.
I'd love to do it. And I like the picture of your dog, the black and white photos.
That's my brother's dog.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, my brother has a dog, and it's now my dog by proxy too. So I get it. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Guys, please go in the description. Please go grab the book. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for watching. Much love, everybody.
Recording stopped.
God bless. Peace. And guys, real quick, if you're still watching, cool episode, cool dudes. Happy to have them on. That was awesome. Let me turn off this air conditioner. If you guys please support the podcast, if you like these discussions, if you like, the off the cuff one on about Blackwater yesterday, or if you like the doctors, interview, or what I talked about towards the end. Interviewing these doctors that spoke out against COVID, spoke out against the vaccine, spoke out against the origins of the Wuhan virus. Now it's a bioweapon, blah blah blah, and other things. Be it election fraud, or be it, I think you can get banned now from some platforms for talking about the Azov battalion in Ukraine or whatever. If you guys like the fact that I allow anyone and everyone on my show to talk about anything, and is it true or not? I don't know, but the very fact that I do mean what I said at the end, and I think that you are all functioning humans with functioning brains who are capable of critical thinking. You don't need to be told what is true and what is not true. You can figure it out on your own. You do not need an expert. I happen to interview the experts, and I put the information out there for y'all to listen to. Use your own critical thinking, digest it, mold it around. That being said, like Captain Fanell said about, soft power is important, but U.S. military power is the most important thing. That's the backing of it. This podcast, spoiler alert, guys, this podcast runs on money, all right? The reason that I'm able to spend hours and hours a day reading books for guests, for coordinating these shows, for scheduling them, for kind of focusing my all onto them, onto marketing them, onto getting them out to y'all, onto, not being on iTunes, not being on YouTube. That's a massive amount of revenue that I do not get. So the biggest sponsor I have is American Hartford Gold. Please text Tommy, Tommy, to 65532. This right here is 100 ounces of silver. I think this was like a little under $3,000. If you use promo code Tommy, you have a chance at winning $5,000 of silver, which is almost two of these. So I have another brick. And to prove that, I mean what I say is these aren't from them. That's from I bought these last year. Like, this is something I do believe in. I legitimately do think we're going to war. But regardless of that, it's just a good thing to have. Offset inflation, offset central bank digital currencies, offset a potential EMP burst, or as we saw a couple weeks ago, all of Facebook going down from a solar flare. Be it a solar flare, or be it an EMP, be it a Chinese bioweapon, or be it an accidental lab leak. Doesn't matter. Effect is the same. It came to your doorstep. So I would say, if you guys like this show, if you like the fact that I'm willing to touch on every topic and let you think for yourself, because you are a functioning adult and you do not need to be spoon-fed opinions. You need to be given information, then you can digest it on your own and you can disagree. Please support the podcast. And by that, I mean support the sponsors that support the podcast. All right. The shows don't come from anywhere. Not to sound like an old man, like, money doesn't grow on trees. The show doesn't grow on a tree. All right. The sound panels you see, the microphone boom, the iMac I'm using, the Sony camera I'm looking into right now, this stuff all has a cost, and it's not cheap. All right. And not only that, it's just time. I put in 12 plus hours a day into this podcast. I'm able to do that because I don't work at a normal job. I do this all day, meaning rent is a business expense. Food is a business expense. If you guys like the show and you want it to keep going, please support the podcast. Please go in the description. Please go to American Heart for Gold or any of the other sponsors. And it'll say what you got to do. Use promo code this, that, or the other thing. But guys, thank you so much for watching. And probably do a video game stream later tonight if anyone's watching this right now. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Again, American Heart for Gold. Text Tommy to 65532. It makes me look good. Thank you so much, guys. Much love, everybody. Take care. Peace.